Alright, hi class. We're going to try to put together a little video here to give you an introduction to nested loops. So what I'm going to do is just create a new project here. As always, we select Java with Ant, Java application. Next, I'm going to give it a name. I'm going to call it 2dice. You'll see why that is here in a second. We'll keep this create main check so we get our little main method where our code will go. And now we have our project, our file, and our class. And here's where we're going to create a couple of arrays that we're going to loop through. So if you recall, we use the square brackets here to indicate an array. And we're going to call this die1. So we're going to have two sets of dice. And instead of using the new int to declare an empty array, we're going to go ahead and put in this array numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Basically simulating a six-sided die. Like we're going to roll a die and those are the 6 possible values we can get. I'm going to do the same thing for a second die. We're going to call that one die2. Use copy and paste to make it easier on us. And what I want to do is basically roll these dice to see the different combinations of dice. So we're going to use our for loop we talked about in class. If you recall, our for loop has 3 different pieces to it. We have our counting variable. I'm just going to call that int I, started at 0. And we're going to count through the entire array of our first die there. So we want it to go die1 dot length, and then I plus plus. So if you recall, we're going to start our variable here at I equal 1. Oops, missed a number there. And we're going to add 1 to it for each loop. How long will we go? We're going to go until die.length. So because our die is 6 integers long, this is going to occur 6 times. It's going to go 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Once it hits 6, this is no longer true when we stop looping and the for loop ends. So let's just see this in action. I'm going to do a system.out.println. Use my autocomplete here. And we're going to say here die1 colon, and we're going to print out what that die1 equals. So if you recall, our I is our variable here that's going to cycle through all 6 possible values. So die1 and then I inside the little square brackets, because I is going to start here at 0 and work its way up to, in this case, 5, because once it hits 6, we've gone too far. So if we run this, we bring up the output, and we run this. It's hard to see, but hopefully you can see that we get all 6 values from our array, one after the other, in our for loop. Okay. Now, easy enough. What we want to do, though, is if we roll 2 dice, see all the possible combinations of dice we can roll. It's important if you're playing games or if you're trying to calculate the odds for any game with 6-sided dice in them. So what I'm going to do is have a loop inside of a loop. So we have a for loop inside of a for loop. Now the important thing is here we can't use int I again. We've already used I for the outer loop, so we need a different variable for our inner loop counter. So I'm just going to use j. Typically in math classes you'll use I, j, and k as indices. That's exactly what we're going to do. So we're going to do j less than or equal to die2 dot length and j plus plus. Now let's put our code outside that loop. We want that inside the loop, so I'm going to cut and paste that back in there where it belongs. And now we have a loop inside of a loop. So what's going to happen is this outer loop is going to start at 0 and then hit this inner loop. The inner loop is going to loop 6 times, finish, come back up here to the outer loop, and it's now going to increment to I equals 1 instead of I equals 0. It's going to encounter that inner loop. It's going to, again, loop 6 times, come back out here to the outer loop, increment I to I equals 2, encounter the inner loop, repeat that 6 times. So we're going to end up doing this 6 times 6 or 36 times. So if we run this again, here's my output screen. Let me zoom in a little bit. And if we run this, you can see we actually loop 36 times. 6 times when the inner loop is at the first value, 6 times when it's at its second value, 6 times when it's its third value, 6 times when it's fourth value, fifth value, sixth value, etc. So what's happening is, look back at our code again, the inner loop is happening 6 times. So this inner loop loops 6 times. The outer loop loops that inner loop 6 times. So what we can do here is, instead of just printing out die 1, we can also print out die 2. Now again, I is our inner loop counter, J is our, outer loop, J is our inner loop counter. So here's how we could get both die 1 and die 2, and then we could also print out the sum of those dies, or dice. Sum would be die 1 I plus die 2 J. I'm going to put that in parentheses so it prints out the number, not the individual values. And we're going to run that. Let me bring the output screen back up again and zoom back in again. And we'll run this. And we see, hopefully, die 1 is 1, die 2 is 1. Add those up, we get 2. Notice die 1 stays 1 because it's now looping the second die. So if we roll a 1 on the first die, second die could be a 1, second die could be a 2, second die could be a 3, second die could be a 4, second die could be a 5, second die could be a 6. And that's all the possibilities for the second die. Well, what if our first die was a 2 instead of a 1? So we're looping on the outer loop now. If that first die was a 2, what could the second die be? Well, it could be a 1, could be a 2, could be a 3, could be a 4, could be a 5, could be a 6. That's as far as we can go. We can only go up to 6. So what about if our first die was a 3? So again, we increment the outer loop and do these 6 inner loop increments again. That's how we're going to get all 36 possible values of rolling 2 6-sided dice. It's a very simple application of what we call a nested loop. It's a loop inside of a loop. This is the outer loop. That'll happen in this case 6 times. The inner loop will occur 6 times. So this outer loop will be 6 times 6 separate instances of this code being run. Okay, does that make sense? So that is kind of our crash course on using a nested loop. So it's a for loop inside of a for loop. There's a lot of applications for it. We're going to play around with those coming up in class.